What is the biggest weakness of each NFL contender? Welcome, football fans. It's Mitch here to rank every weakness from each contender in the AFC and the NFC. There are teams with Super Bowl aspirations, but not all of them are going to make the Super Bowl. Not all of them are going to win the Super Bowl. There's going to be a weakness, a flaw that shows up in the biggest games that absolutely cripples them and does not allow them to win the Super Bowl. So, in this breakdown, in this live stream, I'm going to rank from the least severe, number 8, to the most severe weakness, the number 1 weakness for the contenders. So 8 contenders, weaknesses. Sound good? Let's get to it. Let's begin with the least severe weakness among all the contenders, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles at number 8 with their slow starts. The Eagles have started a lot of games slow this season. We actually talked about it in last week's live stream. The Philadelphia Eagles, dating back to last week, were 792nd out of 796 teams since 2000 in scoring points early in football games, in scoring points in the first quarter. That was last among 368 teams that were above 500 at this point in the NFL season. Now, when we look at their game against the Steelers, they did do better in this regard. They did do better in the first quarter. They scored 10 points in the first quarter against the Steelers, but still their sloppy play was not 100% figured out. They still fumbled the football and allowed the Steelers to tack on a field goal early in the game to tie the game at 3. Okay, so the Eagles still have that sloppy nature in their game. And why I think this is their biggest flaw. First of all, it speaks to the strength of the roster. It speaks to the strength of the team. The defense is fantastic. I think you could make many arguments that their defense is the best in football. Obviously, they have one of the most powerful running games in the league. And Jalen Hurts just showcased against the Steelers that when he needs to pass, he can pass. All right? So it does feel like this team can do what they want offensively, can slow down most opponents in the run and pass game. But what is their flaw? And to me, their flaw would be if you can get the lead on the Eagles because they start slow and because they don't come out with that fire and energy to put teams down in a deficit early, then you can gain a lead and you can force the Eagles to be uncomfortable. Defensively, the best offense to attack a great defense is a balanced one. So with the lead, you're able to run the football, pass the football, play action, screens. The whole playbook is open once you gain that lead. Correct? Defensively, what's the easiest way to affect the Eagles? Well, you want Jalen Hurts to be the primary option in the offense. You want them to be throwing the football more than they run it. Because their run game is so dominant. They just eat time of possession. They just eat the clock. They control the game that way. So by having them behind in games, that's going to allow you to rush the quarterback, sack Jalen Hurts. He tends to take a lot of sacks. He's going to make a couple mistakes. The last couple of years, he's been making mistakes when he's been forced to throw the ball. And they don't have a very complex drop back passing game. So that can also be exposed if you're able to cover A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. That is the biggest problem. But that's why I think starting games slow for the Eagles might ultimately cost them. If they fall down in the NFC Championship to, let's say any of the teams, Detroit, Minnesota, or Green Bay, it's going to be problems because those teams are well-rounded. If they make the Super Bowl and they fall behind to Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so the Eagles need to be better early in football games. In terms of the Eagles, their biggest flaw, according to you guys, is their coaching. I would also agree that out of their roster and their coaching, I would say that is their biggest flaw. I think Nick Sirianni, that being said, I don't think it's defensive coaching because I think Vic Fangio, if anything, has elevated this defense. I think offensively, with Kellen Moore leading the offense, they're a little conservative in what they call. They're a little bit basic, so to speak. And then from the head coaching position, they are very emotional with Nick Sirianni, which is both a positive and a negative. All right, let's move on to the number 7 team, the number 7 contender weakness. Now, that's not number 7 contender. That's the least severe weakness, right? So we're going from least to most severe in terms of weakness. At number 7, it's the Buffalo Bills. And I would say coaching, but I would also say it's just McDermott in big games. If there's one thing I don't trust about the Buffalo Bills, it's Sean McDermott in big games. Now, I can explain this in multiple ways because Sean McDermott is, first of all, a defensive coach, okay? So Sean McDermott runs the defense. He's responsible for the defense. So every time we've seen the Bills reach the playoffs, they have been eliminated, but it has not been because of Josh Allen. Actually, if you look at Josh Allen's stats in the playoffs, he's as historic as the Tom Brady's, the Joe Montanas, and the Patrick Mahomes in playoff statistics. In a per-game basis, he's absolutely dynamic in the playoffs, all right? They have very, very few performances from Josh Allen in the playoffs, maybe 1 or 2 that were not spectacular. Their problem in the playoffs is that their defense falls apart or their coach mismanages the game. And even last week against the Rams, we saw a mismanagement of the game after his defense got absolutely slaughtered and shredded by Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, right? And Puka Nacua. So it's rather going to be one of those two things. If the Bills do lose in the playoffs, I'm almost certain it's not going to be because this year they can't run the ball. They can run the ball. It's not because they can't pass protect. They can pass protect. It's not because they don't have receivers or they don't have Josh Allen playing at an MVP level. They have all those things. The problem might be they don't come with a great game plan defensively. It's not like they don't have enough talent to make something happen, and it's because they mismanage the game at the end. They call their timeouts in the wrong spots. They take a penalty when they shouldn't, right? They kick the ball inbounds with 13 seconds left to, they instead of kicking it inbounds, they kick it for a touchback. They let Patrick Mahomes drive down the field with 13 seconds left, play soft prevent defense. Very possible, okay? Antonio says the Bills are extremely dangerous right now, regardless of the defense. I agree. Jalen says Bills defense will be their downfall once again. Teams love to run on them. I will say their run defense against Detroit was actually pretty darn good. And against the Rams, it was solid. I think their pass defense has been the bigger problem. And with the Lions game, they didn't have both their starting safeties and Rasul Douglas, so at least they have excuses. But McDermott, I think, is the biggest problem, man. I feel like his ability to put together a good game plan and then his ability to follow through with that game management is going to be the downfall of the Bills if it happens. Now, I personally have the Bills as the favorite to win the Super Bowl, so I think they're probably going to win the Super Bowl. But that's just my opinion. If it does happen, I think McDermott's going to have to step it up. Defense, 89%. Coaching 7%, offense 5%. Yeah, their offense is not going to be a problem. They're going to score on pretty much everybody. And the reason is they can run it, they can throw it, they can do it all. But, I think it's going to come down to how well does that defense prepare? And ultimately, that falls on Sean McDermott. Let's move to number 6. That is the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings, in my opinion, this was a tough one to find a flaw. Because the Vikings' biggest flaw to me is like that they're not really amazing at anything. Like, I guess their run defense is elite, so that might not be true. But a lot of their team is just they're good, right? They're good. They're well prepared. They're well coached. So the biggest flaw for me that I could find, like statistically speaking, is their offense allows way too many negative plays, and it doesn't allow their team to hold the game in their hands, right? So they have too many negative plays, meaning Sam Darnold takes too many sacks. They allow the 4th most sacks in the NFL. They've allowed 40 sacks this season. Part of that falls on the offensive line. Also falling on the offensive line, in my opinion, because Aaron Jones, we know, is a fantastic running back. He's had great moments this year, is the fact that they're 24th in yards per carry on the ground. They don't run the ball very efficiently down to down. They don't often, protect the quarterback in drop back pass well enough. Play action, they're great. Sam Darnold actually leads the NFL in play action touchdowns, and his highest percentage of touchdowns comes off play action in the NFL. Okay, so play action is different though, because you often have more people in to protect. You often have more time for the quarterback. The defense is having to deal with the threat of the run. So it's a much easier situation to protect your quarterback. So sacks are a problem. Then you talk about turnovers. Okay, they're 22nd in offensive turnovers, and they're 27th in fumbles lost. And they're also, that correlates with only being 28th in plays per drive. So see how all this correlates? When you take negative plays, when you lose yards on a first down run, when you get sacked on second down, when you turn it over, those are all things that are going to allow your opponent to control the football game. And when you give control to the Packers or the Eagles or the Lions in the playoffs, you're going to lose because your defense is good, but it's not going to be able to overcome that. It's first in the red zone, but what if they actually play well in the red zone that day, that offense? So it's going to be difficult if you're taking so many negative plays. So I didn't see it as Sam Darnold, Mason, because Sam Darnold has played really well this year, and especially lately. I mean, sure. Does he maybe throw the ball to the other team a couple too many times? Does he take too many sacks? Sure. But I think his composure in the pocket, his downfield explosiveness has been fantastic. His ability to scramble has been good. His accuracy has been good. He's run this offense really well. There's no reason to not trust Sam Darnold, in my opinion, based on what he's put on tape this season. So I couldn't make it Sam Darnold personally. Their defense is top 5 in football, and their offense does have a lot of weapons. So it really comes down to mostly their offensive line, but I think just the negative plays that they take on offense that doesn't allow them to control the game. Neely says McDermott's problem is that he puts Allen in too many dangerous situations. Yeah, so, that falls on McDermott. His defense rather doesn't show up. They get down in a game, or they allow a clutch drive late in the game. It just feels like every time they're in a big game, that defense doesn't respond. And all the games they win are shootouts. So if the Bills want to win the Super Bowl this year, they're going to have to at least have their defense rise to the occasion once or twice. It doesn't have to be every game. You can win 1 or 2 playoff games in a shootout manner. It's happened before, okay? Even Tom Brady and Bill Belichick's teams, right? But you're going to have one game likely where the defense stands up because Allen might not be on his game every single time against the best teams in football, right? Offense, 26% for the Vikings, 36% for the defense, which is interesting because they're elite against the run. They put pressure on quarterbacks. They do give up the middle of the field, I think, pretty frequently. They play a lot of zone coverage. But I feel like overall, when you compare them to most defenses, they're pretty good. So I wouldn't really say the defense. I disagree with you guys there. Special teams, 13%. Coaching, 26%. Coaching, 26%. I think that's the strength of their team personally. Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores. I think that's the reason they are where they are. Let's move on to number 5, though, which is the Baltimore Ravens. And this one was tough to figure out in terms of where I rank them because it's been crippling all year. And I want to underline that all year point. Okay, so this had a huge impact on how severe I felt the weakness was. If you've shown a tendency all season, like the Bills have shown a tendency for like 2 or 3 games of having a bad defense or whatever. So it wasn't that severe. The Eagles' just overall weakness is not that irreversible. You can easily reverse your start in a game, in my opinion. The Vikings more comes down to execution and luck. So that's why they're at the bottom of the list. In terms of the Ravens, their pass defense has been a lot worse, more consistently than the previous flaws we've seen, right? They rank 27th in drop back pass defense EPA, which is the worst in the AFC playoffs by quite a wide margin. Actually, the next worst drop back EPA is the Bills at 18th. So that's pretty significant gap right there. So the Ravens have a crippling issue in their secondary. They have a lot of sacks, But I also feel like their sack numbers are inflated by how many leads their offense give them. Their pass rush isn't dynamic. I mean, you think about who's rushing the quarterback for them. It's Owe, it's Van Noy, it's Matabike. Like, Matabike is really good, but I feel like an old Kyle Van Noy being your best edge rusher is not exactly ideal, in my opinion. Shout out to Kyle Van Noy, though. 22nd on third down is the Ravens defense. That speaks to an inability to get off the field with your pass defense, most likely. 31st in pass yards allowed. They're second worst in yards per game allowed, right? And they allow the most first downs through the air in the NFL. 23 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions defensively. So when you think about the Ravens, they have a great offense. They can run the football. And because of that, they can gain leads and they can be explosive. And it's tough to control the game against the Ravens. But they can never fully have the grasp of a game because their pass defense allows their opponent to get back in the game. Because their pass defense is so bad, even if you fall behind 14-0 against the Ravens, you can easily make it 14-14. You can easily get back in the game over the course of time. Because their pass defense allows so many plays. If you fall behind, you're still able to move the football. Some teams are the reverse, where if you fall behind, you're in trouble. But if you get ahead, you're in a good spot. Okay? The Ravens are not like that. So that just allows them to always be viable for a comeback, an upset, something. Right? We saw the Raiders come back against the Ravens. We saw the Bengals absolutely annihilate their defense multiple times. And if the Bengals had an NFL caliber defense, they probably would have beat them twice, right? The Vikings don't have much of a weakness other than being consistent or reliable in the running game. That's fair liquid. That's why it was difficult. Drop It says Ravens' weakness is defensive coaching. That is a fair point. I do definitely feel like their defensive coordinator drop-off has been significant, and I think it's been a huge reason why they are where they are. JJR says Ravens have an identity issue. Defensively, because I think we know what it is offensively. I think it's run game. They like to throw the ball, but I think they know at the end of the day, it's run game. It's Lamar, it's Derrick Henry, it's run the football. Now, we'll see if that transfers to the playoffs, because often the Ravens have gotten a little too cute in the playoffs, especially last year's AFC Championship, where they decided to not run the ball at all. So we'll see if that changes. It should with Derrick Henry. Frankie says the Ravens secondary is so trash. The interesting thing to me is I think the previous commenter is correct, because the Ravens do have talent in the secondary. I mean, these guys this is Marcus Williams. This is Kyle Hamilton. This is Marlon Humphrey. Sure, they're a little bit older outside of Kyle Hamilton, but these guys are, they drafted a first round pick who's playing not bad. They have talent in the secondary. It's weird how they're being deployed. And it's also kind of funny how they're playing. So it feels like they don't have a lot of chemistry. It feels like guys are constantly giving up, exposing their coverages, giving up easy completions. They're a little soft in their coverage. They do have one big issue, which is perimeter corner. They do give up a lot of vertical plays because of their perimeter corners. Those are problems for sure. And the linebacker position, post Patrick Queen, they haven't figured out that position in the middle of the field, covering the middle of the field either. So they have an issue kind of, across the board in their pass defense, especially when they don't have an elite pass rush. Steven says if the Ravens win one playoff game, it will be a deep push for them, honestly. Interesting. I mean, I think you would consider them a favorite to at least win one playoff game. They still have a chance for their division, especially if they beat the Steelers next week. But even if they're a wild card, they're likely going to face the number 4 seed. So I think it's pretty likely that they end up going to the second round. Defense at 70%, special teams 16%, coaching 5%, offense 9%. Shocking that anyone voted for offense, to be honest, considering they're easily a top 3 offense in the NFL. Special teams 16%. That is a fair point. Special teams was considered by me because Justin Tucker has been so awful, but just given how good John Harbaugh has been historically in terms of his special teams, and because I have so much respect for Justin Tucker, I just still believe at the end of the day, if it comes down to the wire and the Ravens have to kick a game-winning kick, they're going to make it. But defense, you're 100% correct. You guys are on it. Absolutely. It's defense, 100%. But run defense is really, really good. pass defense is the problem. I wonder if they could maybe lean a little bit less into their run defense, a little bit more into their pass defense from a structure standpoint. Maybe that would help them play the pass. At number 4, we've got the Kansas City Chiefs weakness. And remember, we're going from least severe to most severe. So the Chiefs find themselves in the middle of the list, which I didn't do on purpose. The Chiefs' tackle situation is catastrophic. I mean, it's absolutely brutal. Like, every time you watch them, it puts their offense in a box, and that's the biggest problem for me. Their offense has no explosiveness. Their offense has no, rhythm. Their offense has no big plays. Like, Mahomes was trying to hit shots down the field, and he'd miss every single time. Now, part of that is wide receivers. Part of that is Mahomes not throwing a good ball. But part of that is because he's always sped up in his process. And then on top of that, he's getting sacked. He's getting pressured early in the down. Feels like every time it's 3rd down and 6+, he's getting hit while he's throwing the ball, or he's having to escape a sack. So Mahomes is having to overcome probably one of the bottom 5 tackle situations in the NFL. DJ Humphries was signed to fix this problem. He's already injured, and he was terrible in his first game, so I'm not sure that's going to fix it. Jawan Taylor is literally always in the backfield. Like, he is false starting on literally every snap that takes place for the Kansas City Chiefs. The refs don't call it, though. And Morris is just completely unreliable. He's been awful every single chance he gets. So the Chiefs' tackle situation impacts their entire offense. It impacts their ability to, just run simple drop back pass consistently. It hurts their ability to run the ball to the edges. They have no outside zone running game at all. Just zero. Like, they don't run the ball outside the tackles. If you guys notice, every single run is right up the middle. Their guards and their center are phenomenal, thankfully, because if they weren't, their offensive line would be horrific. But their passing game as well is so limited. It's basically Mahomes throwing like quick throws, quick screens. There's a reason Mahomes is yards per attempt and his yards intended are so low, because Andy Reid is intentionally protecting his tackle situation, which is hurting their offense from being a complete offense. Drop It says the Chiefs offense just doesn't look the same. Last year, they were pretty bad, man. They were pretty bad last year. That being said, they got it going just enough in the playoffs, but their defense mostly carried them to a championship. Let's be fair. And Neely says what the Chiefs lack in offense, they get back with ref assistance. At times, I think their defense has been not as good as last year, but still good enough, along with their special teams, which has been fantastic. And they have the best coaching overall in football, which does mask most of their deficiencies. At number 3, the Detroit Lions, who just fell to the Buffalo Bills yesterday. And the reason for it was a decimated defense. Their defense is absolutely decimated, and that's due to injury. I think in general, their defense has been their weakness, but it has been a solid defense with their players functioning, right? So their run defense has always been elite in this Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn era, but their pass defense has been a problem. I nearly put pass defense as the issue. And the reason I look at their pass defense is they're far too predictable in pass defense. They blitz a lot and they play a lot of man coverage. And when you have good receivers on the outside with an accurate quarterback, you tend to beat the Lions for big games and big gains, right? But that being said, decimated defense. McNeil has been announced out for the season, torn ACL. If you guys don't know, Alim McNeil is one of the best defensive tackles in football. Like, he's probably around the top 10 conversation. He's very underrated. He's not really discussed, but he is so impactful for their run defense. He is their best run defender. He's the reason that nobody runs up the middle on Detroit. So now that he's out, and we've seen, even against the Packers and the Bills, good running teams were able to run the ball efficiently against the Lions when McNeil was out of the game. So that is going to take their biggest strength defensively and move it back like a whole bunch, which is going to allow teams to be more balanced, which is only going to cripple their defense even more. Because last season, they were still elite against the run. Like, if you guys looked at their run defense last year, their pass defense was a huge issue, specifically cornerback. They brought in Carlton Davis in part to fix that. Carlton Davis is also potentially out for the year. He has a jaw problem now. He got hurt against the Bills. Carlton Davis was a Super Bowl champ with the Bucs, top 20 corner in football for like 3 or 4 years, in my opinion. This year, he's been very big for them. He's given them a press man corner that can at least play man-to-man against the best receivers in football. He's not like shut down, but he's a good player. You remove him from this defense, their cornerback depth chart right now is extremely thin, and it's looking a lot like late last season where they could not cover Puka Nacua or Mike Evans in the playoffs, and they got absolutely just destroyed in the playoffs through the passing game, right? Brandon Ayuk also had a good game. So Carlton Davis is going to be a huge problem because Terrion Arnold, all he does is tug and hold on the outside. So he's not a number one corner. So they're going to have a problem there. Not only that, but of course we know that Hutchinson is out. Hutchinson being their best pass rusher. So their pass rush is decimated. Their run defense with McNeil is decimated. Their secondary and coverage is decimated because of Carlton Davis. They also are without Alex Anzalone, one of their better linebackers. So, I mean, this defense is in trouble, bro. Like, this defense is in trouble. And I honestly, because of this defense, could see this team having an early exit in the playoffs. Maybe that's crazy for me to say, but I wouldn't be shocked if one of their division rivals like the Vikings or the Packers walked into the Detroit Lions building, and with their familiarity of the Lions offense, they slowed them down early in the game. They gained the lead against this defense, and it was hard for the Lions to make it up. Like, I would really not be that surprised. So, yeah, the Lions are in trouble because they feel like an offensive team that really does not have any reliability on their defensive side. Now, in terms of the poll, we've got 78% of the people saying that it is the defense, and I would totally agree with you. 22% say the coaching. That's interesting. Now, I will say that Dan Campbell's decisions, especially when he is rattled, are horrific. We saw that in the NFC Championship. We saw that last week. The onside kick, even the one against the Packers, was just like wild. Like, why are you doing that, bro? So, I don't know. Like, Dan Campbell sometimes just makes some funky decisions. So I do kind of agree with you. Those are definitely their two biggest deficiencies. Steven says, not afraid to say it. Philly versus Kansas City again in the Super Bowl. Personally, I would not favor Kansas City to come out of the AFC because I just think you guys have watched them. Like, I don't know what I have to say. Could Kansas City make the Super Bowl? Absolutely. Would I favor them to get there? Probably not. I would definitely put Buffalo ahead of them. Neely says, I always doubted Goff in a big game, which he had to play from behind and win the game yesterday. Erases that doubt. They lost, but they could have. But what could he have done? I think the thing with Goff is he's a good player. He's a good quarterback, but he's not Josh Allen. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's not even, the Joe Burrow. Like, he's good, but when you're having to go throw for throw, play for play with Josh Allen, and Josh Allen's running around in circles, and he's running to the right sideline, and he's throwing back to the middle of the field to a guy that's not even open, and he catches it. It's like there's only so much you can do, and I think the biggest reason the Bills won the game early in the game, they won the game in the first quarter. Like, the Bills defense got 3 stops in the first half, and the Bills basically were not stopped at all. And that was the difference in the game because the Lions can never make it up. Like, as good as Goff was in the fourth quarter in the second half, and the offense was, right? Like, Goff was pressured a couple times, sacked a couple times. I'm not blaming Goff, but I'm just saying those small things could be the difference in winning or losing a Super Bowl. As we've seen just as an example, the Chiefs and the Niners Super Bowls. Like, if you switch quarterbacks, there's no doubt who wins those Super Bowls, right? But at the end of the day, the Chiefs had Mahomes, so that's why they won the Super Bowls, right? Matthew says, it takes little luck to win the ship. Injuries will be their downfall. It will take a little luck. It always takes a little luck to win the Super Bowl. Every team needs to get lucky. Every team. Zaya Bands says, if the season ended today, Commanders beat the Eagles in the first round. The Commanders? The Commanders? The team that almost lost to Spencer Rattler and Dante Pettis? No. I'm not, no. I don't even know if the Commanders are going to make the playoffs. Did anyone watch that game? How did they almost lose to the Saints? Side note, who do the Saints even have? They don't even have Taysom Hill anymore. Let's get to number 2. That was funny, Zaya. I'm not going to lie. That was comedy. At number 2, the Pittsburgh Steelers are at number 2. Here come the Steeler fans. The Steelers' biggest deficiency, in my opinion, is obviously offensively, but there's something that is specific about their offense that I think is their deficiency, and that is their offensive efficiency, consistency. This specifically in the passing game, but they're also a much worse run team than I think people think, right? Everybody thinks of the Steelers as this black and blue defense, run the football, right? Well, right now, this offense is 30th in rush yards per attempt. 30th. That means they're the 3rd worst team in gaining yards per attempt on the ground, guys. The Steelers don't run the ball efficiently. That puts them in bad spots on 2nd and 3rd down, and that's tough on an offense that doesn't have great skill players, right? This is not the killer bees. This is not AB Steelers, right? Like, this team has George Pickens, and that's about it. Like, they don't trust Mike Williams. Van Jefferson is a guy. Calvin Austin had some nice plays against the Eagles, but I mean, has he showed up for the rest of the season? They don't have receivers. So their drop back passing game is limited. Their overall design from that standpoint, they're so run and play action and screen oriented. They have the worst offensive line pass protection score among all AFC playoff teams. So their offensive line in pass protection is the worst in the AFC playoffs. Their run game is the worst in the AFC playoffs. Their drop back success rate is 18th. And their run success rate is 23rd. So just overall, their offense is far below average. But especially in terms of efficiency, consistency, right? That's what drop back success rate speaks to. Run game success rate speaks to the consistency of those plays. The reason I say it's not explosiveness is because Russell Wilson is capable of dropping back and throwing a moon ball to George Pickens for 60 yards. They're able to hit a Jaylen Warren screen for 40 yards. They're able to maybe break an explosive run or an explosive play every once in a while. And that's what's kept their offense afloat. And their offense looked much better because they played the Bengals. And everyone's like, oh, Russell Wilson was amazing against the Bengals. Yeah, the BC Lions would be good against the Bengals, okay? CFL offenses would be good against the Bengals. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, the offense is going to be a problem. They're going to lose because their offense. Let's be fair. Legendary Steez says it's weird how the Steelers and Ravens traded for Williams and Deontay Johnson just not to use them. Yeah, that was very weird. Now, Deontay Johnson, I think it has more to do with who he is in the locker room. I heard he's a problem, but I don't know. They should cut their losses. And Mike Williams, I don't think that's the problem. I just think that he is coming off a torn ACL. He's had multiple torn ACLs. He can't really run. Like, he's just not that good anymore. But that being said, you would think they would at least give him a chance because, like, they have nobody else. Drop It says, and without George Pickens, they suck. Yes. Land Danger says the Russ honeymoon will be over soon. Yeah, Russ to me isn't even the biggest problem. He's part of the problem, and he's always had a problem with consistency as a quarterback. So when you combine a poor offensive line pass protecting with a quarterback that's constantly looking for big plays and a run game that is very inconsistent, you just have one of the most inconsistent offenses in football. And in the playoffs, if you keep giving the other offense drives and opportunities to score, you're going to lose. That's how it works, right? The number one issue, the number one weakness for any contender out there is the Houston Texans offensive line. This offensive line has consistently been one of the worst in football all season long. And the Texans just had a nice win against the Miami Dolphins. But if you watch that game at all, you would recognize that their defense won that game. I mean, their pass rush was amazing. Derek Stingley was spectacular. And they did a number on Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill. They shut down Tyreek Hill. They shut down apparently the greatest tight end ever to play, Jonnu Smith, as of late. Of course, he couldn't play like that for the Patriots, but that's a side note. The Texans demolished Miami on that side of the ball. But they have no rhythm on offense, guys. And the reason they have no rhythm on offense, they can't protect. CJ Stroud is constantly getting hit. He's pressured. He's under duress constantly. And then they can't run the ball consistently. Their run game is like all Joe Mixon. Sometimes it's a big gain. Sometimes it's nothing. Like, how many times have you seen this team in 3rd and 11, 3rd and 13, 3rd and 16? Like, how many times have you seen that? Plus, you throw in the penalties that they have, and it's catastrophic. If this team had an offensive line, they might go to the Super Bowl. I'm not even going to lie. Like, if they had an offensive line, they would be really good. But here, we break it down, okay? The Texans' O-line, especially the interior O-line, has been a huge weakness. CJ Stroud has been sacked 41 times this season, which is the second most in the NFL. That is only behind Caleb Williams, who literally sacks himself on a regular basis. He has been hurried 58 times this season, which is 17 more than second place. CJ Stroud has been hurried 58 times, 17 more than second place. I repeated it for emphasis. 2.4 pocket time for CJ Stroud is actually really good. 2.3 is like Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, the quickest times in football. 2.4 is CJ Stroud. So it's not CJ Stroud. The offensive line can't block anybody. All right? The O-line is the second most responsible offensive line for pressure, according to PFF, in the NFL, only behind the Seattle Seahawks. And you guys watched the Seattle Seahawks give up 7 sacks yesterday against the Green Bay Packers' average pass rush, okay? 87% of the time, it's on the offensive line and not CJ Stroud. Their left guard is the most responsible player in football for pressure. 26% of the time, he is the one responsible for the pressure. Their left guard is so bad. So bad. And their run game is 31st in rush success rate. Now, they can run the ball occasionally. Mixon does put up 100-yard games. He actually has like the most 100-yard game plus a touchdown in the NFL, tied with Saquon Barkley. But it's few and far between where it's like they rather get an explosive or they don't go anywhere. That's the problem. That's a tough run game to calculate because it ends drives, right? The only worst run game in football is the Raiders. And for like 90% of the year, they were like historically bad. So, yeah, this O-line is terrible. Really bad. Drop It says the Texans O-line is horrid. CJ Stroud is overrated. See, I think CJ Stroud is good. Now, I don't think he's playing as well as he did last year, but I think this offensive line is not doing him any favors. That's why I make it the offensive line. Great Dane says, thoughts on the Packers. What would their weakness be? Okay, Great Dane, I would love to have added the Packers to this list. They definitely are a contender in my eyes. If not, they're a huge dark horse. I thought they played great yesterday. I would say that it's overall their pass defense. I think off the top of my head, they rank in the bottom 3, but I think at one point in the last couple of weeks, they ranked like last in terms of pass EPA allowed defensively. So I think their issue is their pass defense, especially when Alexander is injured. But they're really bad. They're really bad in terms of their pass defense. Or it might be success rate where they ranked last. Okay, so currently they're 31st. I just looked it up. So they're 31st against passes. So basically, they allow a very consistent passing game. They play a lot of zone. Makes sense. Their pass rush is not great. It's yesterday it was great, but it's inconsistent. Their run defense, I think, has been better than past years, so I don't think that's their flaw. I think their offensive flaw would be that they're too explosive reliant. Like, they're too reliant. Love is too reliant on throwing the ball down the field. I feel like they've been better in that regard because they've been running the ball so well, and their first down efficiency has been so great that it's kind of masked their ability to throw the ball, just consistently down the field. Like, there's very few drives you watch from the Packers where they throw the ball for 4 yards, then 7 yards, then 8 yards, then 9 yards. They don't have a lot of calculation to their offense. A lot of it is like their run game's amazing. It's like top 3 or 4 in the league, or they're throwing like big chunks or screens. It's basically their offense, right? And then for the Bucs, thoughts on the Bucs? What would their weakness be? Injuries? It's definitely beyond injuries. I mean, their injuries are a problem. I mean, Antoine Winfield is hurt, but they don't have too many injuries. Like Godwin is hurt, but their pass offense and their offense in general is still very good. So that's not their weakness. Their offensive line, I will say, is probably the most underrated in football, and their run game might be the most underrated as well because of their offensive line. Their weakness is definitely defense. Like, it has been all year. I think if you look at their defense, they're 30th in dropback success rate, right next to the Packers. And I think if you look at the Bucs this season, they are like bottom 5 in yards allowed, I want to say, just off the top of my head. Going to double check that. They are 27th in yards allowed, bottom 5. 28th in plays allowed per drive. Even their run defense, it's been better as of late, so I wouldn't say that's their weakness. But I would say pass defense. And the problem I have with Todd Bowles' pass defense is it's very blitz heavy. Their 4-man rush is not dynamic, so they're forced to blitz. And against good calculated drop back passing games with good smart quarterbacks, they're able to get the ball out fast. They're able to stay in rhythm. Their coverage for the Bucs is very soft, so they allow a lot of short passes, and they just allow a lot of easy completions because when the blitz, doesn't get home, although it's a high risk, high reward, they allow a lot of like just easy completions for quarterbacks. So that's my biggest problem with their defense and their overall team. It's not really a personnel thing. I think it's a design of Todd Bowles' defense. The one area of personnel that might hinder them is like their linebacker coverage and their pass rush. Because their pass rush is not great, they have to blitz. And that leaves their corners isolated, right? So, that's the Bucs for me. And then what do I think about the Broncos defense? I think the Broncos defense is excellent. I am a little... I think they've had a couple bad games. Like the Ravens game was bad and the Browns game was bad. And they were both in different manners. The Browns game was because their pass defense wasn't good. And their Ravens game was because their run defense wasn't good. And then their explosive pass defense was really hurt because of that. I would say it's up there. It's one of the better defenses in the league. I think their problem is their secondary can be a little thin. And when they're without a piece in the secondary, they seem to fall off drastically. Like we saw Levi Wallace start against the Browns, and he was so bad. Like the Browns threw at him like every play. So yeah, the Broncos are a little thin, especially in the secondary. And that's, I think, their biggest defensive flaw. But I think their overall team flaw is probably the offense. Like the run game is not great. The pass game is very smoke and mirrors, and Bo Nix is pretty inconsistent. But I think their defense is probably one of their strengths, along with their offensive line. So that is it. 8 teams, 8 contenders, 8 Super Bowl teams, potential Super Bowl teams. but also 8 weaknesses that could maybe cause them to lose before they hold the Lombardi. There it is, guys. Thanks for watching. It's Mitch. Appreciate you. And we'll be here next week, next Monday. See you then. Peace.